right, I would like to start soon, so I would be glad if, you can get a little bit lower, because I don't know if you heard, but there is no microphone, sadly, so I don't know, can you hear me in the back when I speak like this?
Yeah.
Okay, if I'm getting less and less voluminous, then please just tell me. It sometimes happens, I heard. So thanks for coming. We're very glad to be invited. My name is Irene. I'm part of this project MALMOE, and
And I'm Theo. I'm also part of this project. I'm also happy to be here, and I'm excited for the next couple of, roughly 1 hour I think we have, and then we're going to see, I've heard that we have maybe more time to the back, so let's see how the discussion goes and what sort of questions pop up.
Yeah, so I thought since we have like this hour of time slot, we would just take maybe half an hour to speak for ourselves, and would be glad then that we can just maybe go into a discussion, because we made up some points we want to go through with, but maybe there is stuff you're interested more or less in, and we're very happy to make this interactive for sure. So just that you know what we have in mind. So first we would just roughly introduce the project, because I guess the most of you don't know it. And then we would go maybe into how this was founded, the history of it, and because we are already celebrating our 100th issue, so we are about 20 years old, and it's a nice time to look back to, so we would start maybe there. And also we brought some of the papers with us, so later when you go, or in the meantime, we just give them around, or we would be glad if you pick some. And it's in German, so just that you know. But we also have a homepage, malmoe.org, where you can also check out our newspaper. So and after history, founding stuff, we would maybe go into the process of how we are actually producing this paper. Maybe some of you are interested in such a project, so kind of a DIY go-to. And then in the end, it's just about status quo, our personal perspectives and topics that are concerning us these days, because there is a lot of reforming and stuff we have to deal with. And I think that would be about it, and then we just open for going into discussion. And also in the meantime, whenever you feel like, just raise your hand, or we would be happy to talk with you. All right. So about the project itself, I already mentioned it or showed it. It's a newspaper, and the issue is released 4 times per year. So we don't have this very regular coming out date. We are more or less seeing how it goes, but normally there is a big summer break, so that's for sure. And I would say roughly we need about 2 months to produce one paper. And so the paper itself is at places around Vienna for free. So we distribute it to cafes we like, or libraries, university buildings, or just to colleagues of ours who have a record store or whatever. So whenever you're around in Vienna or some other cities, you can check for the MALMOE. We also have, I think, somewhere here the places we are shown, we are at. Thanks to,
I'm going to look for it, but there's
there is a list. It's not, we try to keep it up to date. I'm not sure if that's true at the moment, but other than that, it's also possible to get the MALMOE as a subscriber to your home for a little amount of money, so that's also a way to get to read us. As I said, the MALMOE is about 20 years old, and now you can see it. So it's mostly in German-speaking countries, since we are producing the paper in German, and I would say the focus is also for sure in Austria, and for sure also in Vienna. But this is an issue we might also want to talk about, like how to get into more rural spaces, because we're, like, I'm from a small town in the west of Austria, but for me, for example, I never really brought it there, so to kind of spread it again into, yeah, outside of the big city. So much about that. I would shortly go into how we are structuring the paper, just that you have an idea. Yeah, so here you can also see, like, we're trying to archive the paper, more or less. So that's an ongoing thing. And then we have, like, these 4 Rubriken. One is called Alltag. I would translate it really in daily life, more or less. Then we have a section for Regieren, like governments. And discursive, it's like summing up short texts to discuss something very practical normally and find a multi-perspective way to deal with it. And MALMOE is not just a leftist paper, we also have a focus on pop culture. So we have a big Erlebnispark. We don't want to call it culture. I guess there was a big issue about not calling it culture, because we have a broader idea of what it means. Like, I think the founders were very much into raving and party and stuff, so, you know, it's like not just book reviews.
Hopefully. And not just high culture. I mean, you know, like more the cultural studies approach that we, when it comes to culture, then you ask yourself, okay, what is actually culture? And then when you try to break it down, maybe everything is culture, and then you need to challenge the established idea of culture, I think, and that's what the founding or the founders, I think, have tried in the beginning too. Mm-hmm. Very much cultural studies influence too.
Yeah, definitely. So let me see. And maybe just for interest, like our financing, since I said we're free for most of the people to read, there is a sponsorship from the Austrian government, the media department, and we're more or less funding 2 papers with that money, and the rest we fund via ads and via also different, what is Förderantrag? Like, we have to ask people for money basically in institutions, and sometimes they give us some, so if we're lucky. Yeah, so that's like the basic stuff I would say about the paper as a project for now. Is there like something you want to know at the moment? It's like unclear, or do you get a rough idea of what it is? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
What does it mean?
Malmö? It's a city in Sweden that I know, but I don't know why it's called Malmö.
There are a lot of rumors actually, and my favorite rumor is, graphic layouters would say, well, it looks nice, it makes sense to have like this two rows of letters there. So Malmö was like, okay, this somehow fits, it's nice for the eye. So that would graphic designers say, and my personal theory is, I mean, it's almost 25 years old, so it was before I was politicized. But my personal theory is that the leftist group got together and were thinking really hard, okay, what's a cool name that we can come up with? And in the end, they just gave up and just, okay, let's take a random Scandinavian city and let's ease this discussion and let's go on with the paper. But it's just my perspective.
And also titles in Malmö, it's just a weird thing in general. Like sometimes we read our front page and we don't remember what we were actually writing about because the titles are so confusing. So yeah.
The people who write for the project, are they part of MALMOE, or is it contributors from other projects, or how's? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, we are a collective of people who are all in some way employed more or less, and this is just our side project. So also later when we talk about issues and challenges, it's probably like that's for sure a thing, like this is voluntary work, yeah. Yes, and what's the goal? And yeah, maybe, I don't know, do you want to say some words about it? Maybe we also go into history and funding and then what was the goal, and I take that question with me. Was that also concerning, yeah?
What sort of
Okay, maybe we can answer that a little bit later. Do you want to go into history and funding a little bit, like Sylvia, or shall I?
I can start a little and you can add.
Okay.
So, I don't know, since I guess we are an international group, like 23 years ago, there was the first right-wing extremist government in Austria. So that was a big rupture through Europe. And there were actually sanctions against Austria from the European Union, and there was a lot of mobilization in the wider left. And this was also the time, maybe you remember, no, there was the big demonstrations in Seattle, 99 I think it was, where a new kind of left perspective on activism, new coalitions emerged, and I would say in this sort of vibe, in this sort of environment, also Malmö kind of was rooted, because also in Vienna there was a new idea of forming coalitions. Let's politicize club culture. Let's take it to the streets. There were big parades, and like what I've heard, oral history sort of stuff is really that there was media was missing. Like there was no media that actually took up this new youth movements, new political movements, and then some people got together and actually founded Malmö and said, okay, we have to have a media support or medial coverage, what's actually going on, to let people know, okay, what's actually happening in the city. And this was pre-internet times, like connectivity, and people really, the founders thought, okay, we're gonna do 2 issues a month, like every 2 weeks. And they were kind of, I don't know, I just can imagine it, like there was a big vibe of energy, a lot of creative power, a lot was changing, and as we also experienced these years, know that sometimes when extremist rights get into power, there's a lot of mobilization happening of like, what can we actually do? How can we counter this? And I imagine it's sort of 23 or so years ago, this kind of energy was with Malmö.
Yeah, and also like they really wanted to, I think, make themselves autonomous or fill this gap, because the rest of the leftist magazines that were around didn't fit this idea of what they wanted to do. They felt like either it's very, I'm speaking now as a spokeswoman, right? So this is stuff I was heard of, but they felt like it's too theoretical or party-based what there is out, and they want to really have a spot where they can discuss stuff and also take in like daily life, even with knowing there is no right life and a wrong, but still this is what we're facing, so let's be critical about that and not be like blindsided by our whatever ideological perspective. So they were not, I think they didn't close that up too much. They were kind of, yeah, for sure anti-fascists, but they didn't label themselves.
Yeah, and there's a waving. Yes?
About what the political situation in Austria was.
The political situation?
Yeah, which was like sort of in relation to the founding of MALMOE. Can you like in short explain what were like the political problems addressed at that time? Like where was the extremism? Because I'm very poorly informed about Austrian politics at that time.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as with history, no, you can elaborate on this. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
Basically, Schüssel was in charge and brought, as Theo already said, like the far right into government. And until then, it was big taboo. So this thing happened at the time, and it was changing totally the whole way to discuss politics in our government. So there were stuff that wasn't there before, and now it was just salonfähig, as we call it, so you could talk about it where there was not space before. So I think basically that's the main issue, what was happening in Austria.
Does that mean that this magazine was always founded by some institutions, or is this a more recent phenomenon?
I think I didn't understand the question.
Because you said the history of MALMOE was to make an autonomous publication. And what I wanted to ask is whether it was always founded by institutions, or whether this is something that has happened in the recent time. Yes, like where did you get your money from? At the very beginning.
Yeah.
Thanks, I was,
I'm sorry.
As far as I know, I think it was, do you know that exactly at the beginnings, how it worked?
Good question. I mean, in Austria, there's the structure that the ÖH, the Austrian Student Union, they have money that is kind of accessible for left groups, because student unions usually are left orientated, so you can apply as a project for money, and you can use this money quite independently, through my experience. But
like for the conference here.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. So this is also funded by the same money that MALMOE is funded. And I wouldn't say, when it comes to the question how does this influence us, or like makes us less independent or less autonomous? And that's of course always a good question. And I'm also like, because if you just open the paper on the backside, there's a city Vienna advertisement, for example, which finance the whole paper basically. And I'm also sometimes worried, okay, we write a critical article about the city. I hope they will still finance us, support us money-wise. But so far, I would say our work hasn't been influenced by, we never got a weird email. And the city of Vienna, usually, they write quickly, like what, they're very controllable.
Sometimes the ads and the timing when we actually published weren't that much in line, but that was like one big issue. But since this is a project we do like by the side, it's also not such a pressure on us. I feel like we take the best out of it what we can. Yeah.
So you were mentioning how this was founded, I guess, around the WTO protests. You mentioned Seattle, and kind of since then there's also been another intervening moment. That was kind of something that was big for a lot of what sometimes is called the Generation X, right? So people who would have been born in the 60s or in the 70s and would be 20 or 20-something listening to Rage Against the Machine in Seattle at that time. And since then, there's also been another generation of leftists, sometimes called millennial leftists. And I was wondering, and maybe you were going to talk about this anyways, how MALMOE has interacted with that change in history, or been influenced by the change, or influenced that, or just that kind of change in that sense? Meaning there's kind of a different point than the point of departure.
Yeah, just a quick response maybe from my side. As you can see, we are not the ones who founded MALMOE. So there was a change, yeah. And I think MALMOE had to change.
Yeah, and what I find, maybe it can't, but no, we can also maybe go away from our structure. What I find actually quite magical and inspiring is that MALMOE, there's no one from the old generation kind of saying how this paper has to be. So I would say every generation of people doing this paper, and if you want to put it into generations, maybe we are the 6th generation of MALMOE. So, it's kind of vague, and there's like shifts of generation and transitions and stuff. But actually the people doing it set the focus pretty much. I don't know how this came about, but I would say you can see a clear line of topics from the beginning to today. So although we have been different people, the kind of the line of the paper is somehow, you see this is kind of MALMOE stuff, or this is stuff you would publish rather in MALMOE than in other left magazines or papers in Austria. But although what I wanted to say is that every generation brings their own focus, and I would say yeah, so I'll leave it at
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just to add something to that, like we're a group, so there is group knowledge, but individual knowledge is different from that. So somehow you have an idea of what MALMOE is, somehow you have friends who maybe bring you to write an article and then you write more and stuff. So for sure it's flexible, and for sure not every individual has like the same knowledge than the group, but you understand it's like two dimensions, and as I think we both tried to say, there is really a lot of this individual knowledge used for the paper, and not so much this group knowledge that is like hovering over us and be like, just can talk about this and that. I don't feel restricted by the tradition, but still I feel like embedded in it, and it's a kind of nice feeling for me at least. Yeah.
You just said that the paper had to change, and I'm interested, like, what were like the sensibilities like of both of you when you came like to this paper, and how did it look like, and how did you thought it had to change, like what had changed? So like elaborate, like.
Yeah, it's a good question. We wanted to come like later for the personal
okay,
perspectives,
then
but
sorry,
we
I
can
want
take
to
it already in.
Sure.
What do you feel like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to, but I think it's all right now to slowly transition also in the discussion. I mean, why not? Questions are good.
So I can like start from my experience. So I think I was like studying in Vienna, so I had like this very nice time of a lot of free looking like how to organize my time, and I always wanted to do something besides my study that is clearly political activism. So I was like doing different stuff, but then finally a friend of mine who was already in Malmö asked me if I want to like just come by for an editor meeting and then maybe write with him an article. So that was what basically happened, and you know, you're there and it's nice and you like the idea and you like the people, and then you somehow feel like, maybe that's a spot where I can do stuff that I like, and it has already a foundation, and you know, you don't have to invent everything new. There is a structure, you can change it, the structure, it's not fixed, but it gives you also a little bit of help, and that's what I really enjoyed about it. And yeah, I think also when I began there was very like different people, like also older people. They're not old, but it was not just students who were in their 20s, you know. And I enjoyed it somehow because I felt like in the political bubble I was, there were mainly people in my age. But yeah, my issue for sure was also that the kind of, we can talk about diversity later, but there was not many female-read people in the Malmö, and so I also felt like, I think that's what you also kind of need. And I don't know, how was it with you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I arrived in Vienna 7 years ago, and luckily someone in Berlin, I'm from Berlin originally, handed over the Malmö to me. And so then I was like always interested in kind of this sort of journalistic writing also, but my background is social work, so in social work studies you don't really learn academic writing, or also, I mean, there is some seminars on critical theory, but it's rather low. You're rather like asked to do your job and not question so much about it. So I was really curious to also learn how to actually translate thoughts into a text, to kind of this pedagogical move, no? The text do that you try to bring your ideas into a text form and then let other people participate and let it discuss maybe with other interested people. So that was kind of my motivation to start with Malmö, and since I was kind of hooked through this issue I had in Berlin, I arrived in Vienna and joined the first, we sometimes have like open settings where just interested people are asked to just come by and get to know us basically. And I joined one, and then things happened from there, I guess. And now, I mean, this is 7 years already ago. Sometimes I had a break of Malmö, but now the last 3 years I was quite involved in the project. And yeah, as just to point out, I mean, I don't know who of you reads German. Actually, we started a series, I think 6 issues ago, where we reflect on 20 years of Malmö. And I think this is what, I'm sorry it's German, but for those who read German, it's kind of cool because we asked basically the founding generations and shortly after people involved in Malmö to reflect up on their time. And also what Irene mentioned, there's a big question also of, like, for example, not white voices to be more diverse from the Redax collective, but also the issue that always very male dominated, and kind of how we can change this, how we can make the structures more accessible, more diverse, have more voices heard and represented in the paper. Yes.
Also, like, we strongly have an academic background, and I think it's also kind of the paper that we are very focused on text and academic language and stuff, but I think we always have to reflect on that. Is that something we want, or is it, you know, like making doors closing?
I think you was for a long time, no? Raising your hand.
So I wanted to, I mean, you're kind of touching on it now, and but you kind of brought it up before that MALMOE, from its inception in so 2002, 2003, has gone through a lot of different iterations. So is that, maybe like a more technical question, is that the editorial line, and has the editorial line changed over time? But maybe the more general question is, and going on something you said earlier, the idea was that having a publication that wasn't married to a political party gave you more freedom to express and reflect on the left at the time, right? So instead of having to adhere to an ideological or political line, it was just whoever the editors were in charge and who you could find to kind of write. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is more this change. How's the focus of MALMOE changed over the past 20 years? You know, in Platypus, we are trying to kind of be historians of the left in the past 20 years, kind of since 2004, since the anti-war movement. So there's things like the anti-war movement, Occupy, kind of the 2015 socialist turn with Syriza and Podemos, and now, you know, we're kind of at this like COVID moment. So how has MALMOE, what are the phases of MALMOE? What were you guys interested in? And do you think that not having that freedom has allowed you to reflect on those crises, those political crises, better than kind of political organizations that might be in Vienna? Sorry, it's a big question.
No, it's a very interesting question. I think for me it's really hard to answer it because I don't have the overview, and I didn't make this what would be necessary, this critical look back and kind of follow the tracks of MALMOE that well. So I wouldn't really know how to answer that, besides like some lines I can see that were clearly taken up, and it was resistance for sure in its all forms, and like since we're in Austria, for sure the memorial of the NS regime. So I think these are clear lines, besides like the pop cultural, party, electronic kind of focus. But yeah, maybe you have more to say to that.
No, I mean, it would be a cool project to really have kind of this discursive approach towards MALMOE, to see when there was kind of ruptures or interventions or whatever sort of crisis, and see how MALMOE actually took this up and what kind of perspective MALMOE took up.
Well, you've said that you've just you've interviewed old editors and old contributors. So how was that? Like, did that come up at all? Was asking for those reflections?
Not so much, but because we framed the question more like, what's your personal perspective on how did you feel making this paper? What were your experiences? And I think like really from the rather micro perspective, what were your challenges? What would you make different now? How do you see it today? What are the kind of homeworks you would give to MALMOE? And we didn't focus so much on the analytical level, like on the broader. This is how I understood your question, more on the macro level, what's actually going on the macro level. But then I would also say that the macro perspective is always present in because we haven't had yet the time to speak about. We have the resorts, like the general topics that are reoccurring every issue, and then we have like highlights or topic topics, usually 2 or 3. And for example, with 2015, the big summer of migration, you can clearly see that this, I mean, before also deportation was always also a topic in Malmö, but after that, much more visible. We had this kind of this new European fortress theme much more present in the Malmö also. So I would say you see those big topics occurring in society rather on the, or this is often what happens in Malmö, rather on the micro perspective, like how are activist groups in Vienna dealing with the Fortress Europe topic, for example. How in the 99, I think, in the issue, we have a big highlight on pushbacks, for example. And so I would say the bigger scheme is present, but not in an analytic, like not so often in analytical text where we, from a theoretical perspective, focus on this.
Can I ask
I
a
would
very
agree,
quick
yeah.
question? Does MALMOE then play a kind of unifying, or do you see it as playing a unity project? Because you just mentioned different groups. And I know also earlier, and this goes back to Rebecca's question, that there was a sense of not being tied to one of the parties, which would have been censoring in a certain way in terms of unity, because it would have been like, that's their line, this is our line is the best line. So,
definitely. I think that's exactly what the idea is, to bring together different people who normally don't talk with maybe each other, and this is kind of the platform to do so. So, like this micro perspective you were talking about, I think that's really what we can deliver. Like, we are well connected in Vienna and stuff, and with different groups, so we let them speak. So we are kind of the curator to let someone else speak. And yeah, we write articles, but it's not like we are experts in everything. So also we don't want to act like it, I think. It's not like, oh, we need still an article about the Queen's death, who is a royal expert, and then someone has to do like this. No, definitely not. So we don't want to be that, I guess. Or at least I can say that for myself. And there are so many hands up. I'm sorry if I'm mixing around, but yeah.
Yeah. I think you were just beginning to touch what I will ask, but like in general terms, like what kind of politics do you support? Like you say that you're a leftist newspaper. What do you think that makes you a left newspaper? What's your understanding of that?
Next question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just start with the example. Maybe this is also how we. I mean, of course, Malmö is not like anything goes left. I mean, but this kind of to select depends also on the collective. Like we have like when we, for example, we get a controversy text, or like I get a text email, like there's a suggestion. This often happens, and not. I wish it would happen more often, but sometimes we get, hey, look, I wrote this little essay. Maybe you can publish this in Malmö. So then we get this essay, we read it. Usually it's fine, we have some edits, but sometimes it's a controversial topic, and I then kind of talk to the collective, like, hey, what do you think about it? And then a discussion usually starts. And so, and this discussion, of course, is informed by the people, by the, you called it, the group knowledge, like what are our individual but also collective accesses. And through this, not outspoken, but a sort of paper line gets created, because we are in the process of discussing. And the example I have, I don't know, it's already some years ago, and since then Malmö has kind of the stamp of being an anti-Deutschen paper, because it was during the time when the Butler quote went viral about if the Hamas being a leftist organization. I guess you're all informed about this. And then Malmö put a Butler focus topic and got the anti-Deutschen stamp, but the very next issue, Malmö took another perspective on the whole thing. So kind of challenged its own perspective, basically. And I think having this openness of like having a debate, an ongoing debate, and not being stuck to one position, but also allowing ourselves basically to change our positions, is something that is, I would say, also very signifying for Malmö. And I'm very happy that we have this kind of this line and not becoming this grumpy lefties who say, no, this is not right. Yeah, so, but it's hard, it's a hard question. I mean, yeah, what's left and what. I mean, yeah. Just one little sentence. I don't want to talk too much, but it's like I think what's also cool for MALMOE is that we try to bring in voices that are not so present in general. So when we no one talks about pushbacks, and then we have the space of like showing this inhuman practice of border police in Europe. So and I think this is very important to highlight this, what's actually happening. Yes.
I think you already raised your hand longer.
Yeah. I was just noticing you. Somebody asked about your politics, and you actually talked about your editorial process, and you talked about MALMOE as a collective. And I was wondering, do you think that publishing a newspaper is a political act in and of itself?
I think the approach is that it's an activist project for sure. I mean, it's always the question of how much we can reach and how much we can do somehow. And I think we chose that exactly because it's in our resources, in our range of resources we can do. Yeah, so I see it as an activist project, yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's to form a voice and to give voice to others, basically.
I wanted to ask, both of you touched that like the reason for MALMOE to be founded was kind of like that there was a pushback of what the discourse like in civil society was about and how there was no possibility to talk about specific things because the government was becoming more right-wing and also like leftist groups had specific authoritarianism kind of. And I wanted to ask if this is like a outside kind of reason that like makes MALMOE an oppositional kind of project to this discursive field that existed. Do you have like a goal to like make what MALMOE is doing common praxis, kind of like make this possible, and then therefore like, because I had just thought about this because like you told us that you have like the 100th edition of your newspaper out now, and I was thinking like we had like a similar thing in Platypus that like we became older than 10 years old or something, and the goal was like to make Platypus fulfill its goal in that time and therefore like be not necessary anymore. And it was kind of like a crisis that existed so long. And I'm thinking like, is there like a point that you work towards that like MALMOE kind of becomes not necessary anymore? Or is it like, will MALMOE in the best case exist in 50 years also? Or is there like a goal to work towards?
Yeah, I definitely would like it to sustain because I feel like it's for sure it's a political act we're doing that might be fulfilled, but also it's my community somehow, I want to go to the release party and I want to have to drink with my friends, so I don't want to have this being like done at some point. So yeah, as I said, since there is people coming together and it's a platform for a community, I think this platform will always be a matter for it to exist further. So I wouldn't see that there is an aim and when we reach it, it's done.
No. The question also tries to get at the political line, no? This is kind of a linked question to like, what's your line? Yeah, I totally have to agree with Irene. What I find interesting is, I mean, of course MALMOE is not out of reason, no? Like there is, because of the political situation, there was like MALMOE founded, and this hasn't changed too much in the last 22 years, rather to the worse than to the good, I would say. Or it's hard to say, I don't want to go into this judging, because the world is kind of complex, and I think just this is about my comment, since the contradictions and society is so complex, I think it's kind of important and cool to have a paper that doesn't really give answers, but try to map somehow how to maybe maneuver through this complexity, make it often more complex and more contradictory, but yes.
Yeah, you said that you did reporting on pushbacks, and it's like really important since like minimum since 2015. Do you have like an example how the reporting on these occasional practices maybe changed the practice or informed like milieus out of the MALMOE or outside of the leftist circles of activists? Like for example, functioned reporting like had?
I mean, I wasn't so involved in the pushback issue. I was more like 4 or 5 years ago. There was a big movement in the social work sphere, like where I'm situated, and there were strikes again in the social sector, which rarely happened. And I wrote on this situation because I was also part of it, and this make me meet people from the sphere, letting them know what MALMOE is, had this sort of, I think, feedback you were mentioning, like, cool, you make a paper and then you make connections, you get more connected, and this then informed also the striking movement because you had this kind of access pool and exchanged basically what in other workplaces happened, and through this practice and through this writing, personal writing, you could connect. Yeah, with the pushback, I mean, I for sure know because the people have really been in Bosnia and in the eastern parts, that with the double, like also activists, like documenting the pushbacks was the first aim, but then also having in mind, okay, we want to report, like write on this journalistically, so also through this making attachments and making contacts. But in general, I find it hard to kind of measure or like to have clear signs because my personal wish is, since Irene mentioned, no, this paper lies everywhere, so I hope someone just grabs it randomly and then is somehow influenced by this little spark from the Bible. Yes.
Yeah, but for sure, like when we ask people if they want to write for us, this also gives them opportunity not just to, if they want to say something, but also to reflect on what they actually are in it. So I feel like this is already feedback that happens by the process itself, and I like the part about it, yeah.
One of the things we talk about in Platypus is this idea that your theory of the present is your theory of history, and your theory of history is your theory of the present. And I think it's interesting that you conceive of a need for some kind of unity between different left groups that is simultaneously non-dogmatic or non-sectarian in a certain way, and that things need to be posed as questions rather than answers, and kind of further make things more complicated rather than less complicated. But starting from the kind of founding point in the kind of post-Seattle 99 moment, what's the kind of narrative in MALMOE about why the left was in such a situation of essentially total defeat, that that kind of intervention was necessary?
Yeah, let's go Silvia.
Telephone joker.
Yeah. I cannot really, I'm sorry, but me personally, I cannot answer the question how they were doing that. Like, I think if you ask like now, it would be more easy, but...
Is that part of what you described as the group knowledge or the generational transfer, an idea of it was because, you know, like in 1945 or in 1918 or in 1848, therefore things were in a bad way, and MALMOE had to come in and open up this dialogue on the Viennese activist environment?
I mean, what was for sure there was that social forums were scattered, right? So this kind of old way how the leftists were structuring it themselves it wasn't in line with what daily life looked at. As they said, they were going and being anti-fascists on the street while raving. So where was this structure of the leftists represented? So I think that change for sure was an issue to step in and put the finger in that wound. But the crisis of the left in general, I would imagine it up.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, I really like this sort of questions because this, at least for me or for us, it's kind of also challenges like how can we place MALMOE in this bigger picture, which we don't have this framed answers we can just drop. So this is kind of, you you got us actively thinking of making sense of this in this bigger frame. Yeah, but they're the answers. Please.
Not really an answer, another question. So maybe relating to our questions right now, like how do you reflect then on like the recent developments of the like Viennese and Austrian left? Like there has been like new like organizations coming up, or like for example like the KPÖ flooded with new fresh members. Like how would you reflect on these like recent developments on the Austrian left? Is there a discussion around these topics? Like,
I mean, for sure there is, but I think like in this issue or the last we didn't really highlight that, but I would say that the whole situation now in Vienna, it's like, you know, what the fuck, but how to answer to that? I think the idea is to have like a pluralistic idea and have a fragmented, scattered answer to that. So there is no, I cannot give you the answer because it would be me and I'm speaking somehow for the project, but at least we as a paper, for example, we didn't sit together and say, okay, we have to find a statement regarding to this. We don't, but yeah. I don't, yeah, do you want to be like more specific? I don't know, I hope it's okay being in this vague statement, but somehow, yeah, I feel like it.
Yeah, just adding maybe my like also a personal story. There's also links, no, like kind of this KPÖ, like they try to do a coalition together, and like then what happens with leftist group? I think got into fights and whatever. And a lot of my friends or close people are in links, and I was also somehow involved. And then I really had troubles making MALMOE and being in this political party engaged, because I felt like, okay, this is somehow a double role. I don't want to play, I don't want to be in a political party and do this newspaper. I felt like there's a sort of resistance. Also, I mean, bottom line, we haven't really touched upon this yet, but everything we say, I would say, is informed by the thing that we only have certain resources to put in. Since this is completely voluntarily, no one gets money off this. Always a lot of things happen quite randomly because someone has apparently resources to do a theme or like a topic issue, and then we are very happy if people come and like, hey, we can fill 3 pages of this newspaper. So, yeah, but I wanted to say is that I just personally stepped away from this double role of being in a party and having the aim of making an undogmatic left paper. Yeah, and then just to add another question, then again, no, the question is what is left politics, and is party politics the only left politics? And I think MALMOE would disagree. This could be said maybe. Yeah, that's. But yeah, you go.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Just a simple question about who reads the newspaper? Like, is it activists? Is it the general public? Is it students? And maybe another question, like, when you're doing meetings, who do you imagine to be the kind of target audience? What would be who do you want to read it?
Yeah, so I know that this who is your target group is like the thing people nowadays answer when they. I think it's a kind of neoliberalistic way to find like more people to read the stuff. I feel like we want to reach as much people as we can and the most diverse people as we can. So that's why it lays like around the city without being targeting this and that people. But for sure it's kind of I would say it's mostly left people because the topics are very going into detail. I think it's very hard if you open the newspaper and you don't have any idea to kind of follow the narrative. You know, there is like a kind of basic set of what we think our readers maybe know already, because we want to discuss in that and that more deep or whatever, or this is the group we're inviting to talk about it. So we cannot give like this low threshold welcome to the left thing. That's not what we're doing, I would say. But other than that, Yeah, do we have a target group?
No. I mean, what I find cool is, since this paper is around for so long, and we also go to demonstrations and then just hand out the paper, and then you often, like, people react if you do something with them usually. Either they take it or they don't take it, but some say, ah yeah, I've written in issue 48, 15 years ago or so. And then you get, and this is also, I would say it's sort of from the bottom, like history from the bottom, that this, since it has been around so consistently, people know about it somehow. And yeah, there's this kind of archive, like all the people involved are the archive. And the point I wanted to make, for example, if there's the pushback focus, or here we have a Rote Hilfe focus, then of course we also enable or activate certain bubbles, of course, or certain groups that then kind of get more of the issue, hand out the issue, and through this we also always address specific groups. So yeah.
I think, yeah.
You were talking about the editorial process before, when you get outside submissions and when someone wants to submit an article who's not in the editorial board. And you said that sometimes it can happen that an article is controversial, and then it's like a group process, a discussion starts. And I wanted to ask if you could talk about what would be like a controversial subject, what makes content controversial, what will trigger a discussion, how will it be resolved?
I mean, I think controversial for us as the editor group is something that we would say, I wouldn't just agree with that like this. I don't know, we are like a group of, at the moment, 7-8 people, so there are a lot of opinions around, and it's not like we are all from the same bubble coming and this is our project we do for our friends. It's more like broad, I would say. So in this group of 7 people, if we have this article and someone is like, maybe we should talk about this somehow, not just because we're not in line with it or something, but maybe it's just very ambiguous in the topic it's taking, and then it's about us to also have a discussion about it, because I don't know shit maybe about it, so let's better get into it somehow before we just let it out. You know, I think, yeah, that's basically what I would call controversial, but yeah, I think we have some thresholds who are not okay, like for sure. I don't know if it helps if I say it, but we don't want to have fascist article around or sexist article around. You know, like there is for sure a basic ground of what's not okay, but that usually doesn't happen, that we get like super crazy articles. It's more like, yeah, more ambiguous somehow of what it touches or something like this, or is very like just one focus in mind and doesn't give any opportunity to the other side to talk. So maybe we also have to decide, is there another text who is filling up that gap? So we have at least like 2 texts covering that up somehow.
Yeah. It's also a question of circling around the line of this paper. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, I mean, I think we also picked up the paper at a very, like the paper was also at times in the last 5 years very, like little people did a lot of work, let's say. So, and now we have a new kind of, maybe we can call it of, say a new generation popped in, but new people taking over responsibilities, and there's no more time of reflection. And also what I was getting at, who kind of takes care of our emails wasn't so, you know, wasn't replying. So, and that's of course, if an author like kind of sends a text and didn't get a reply, of course they don't ask again. You know, this is general communication, I guess. But what we do as an editor board, we of course ask friends or people we know, or ask friends if they know people who know. So we have this is already a selection before. You know, so we have often people that we through first or second hand know, and then we of course, then this practice is informed by our bubble as well, and what we understand as left politics, or what our perspective is on topics that we would like to see represented in the paper. And of course, this is in a way shaping every issue anew. But yeah, one should do a discourse analysis of like what's the political line of MALMOE. I would be very interested.
I'd like to offer an interpretation of your name.
Sure, I'm ready.
It's an acronym: Marxismus, Leninismus, Maoismus, Österreich.
All right, yeah.
I don't know why you haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of fits the politics. But on a more serious point, Marx started as a journalist, and there was a kind of critical activity to journalism in a way. It was sort of it has a tradition on the left going back to pamphleteers in the revolutions of the 18th century, and other kinds of journalists who the activity was somehow associated with being left-wing in a way. And in Marx's plan with Arnold Ruger for their failed journal, Marx says, we adjust for the ruthless criticism of everything existing, and we don't bring our plan and say, bow down before it here. And obviously from then on there's a long tradition of kind of left journalism as a kind of critical endeavour to reflect something about society back to itself. And so I'm just wondering whether you understand yourselves in that heritage in any way, whether you take any inspiration from Marx as a journalist, or that slogan of ruthless criticism.
Yeah, so I would say for sure. I would say it's maybe not quoting Marx as you would do, but yeah, definitely. I'm coming from a post-Marxist theory line, and that's where I'm at. So I would agree with that sentence, and as we said, there is no answer given. So the critique of the society is for sure a mirroring what there is at the moment. And it's what I said also with that the founding was concerned with just hovering above the lives, above the reality of lives, and we want to take those realities in, so that's exactly this kind of mirroring society, but put in a more theoretical framework.
So I have a question about, let's say, the international context. So you said that you're mostly focused on Austria and on Vienna, but in the time of the existence of MALMOE, there have been actually quite a few other journals and newspapers founded on the international level, right? For example, Jacobin in the 2010s, or also quite recently, for example, Sublation magazine. So I was just wondering, you talked about I don't know, other political groups, and that you want to kind of not be adherent to a specific one, but how do you see yourself in this international context of other leftist newspapers, of other ways maybe of publishing on the left? Do you see any necessity to connect with them, or do you see any necessity to put it in a more international framework?
I don't know, shall we also talk a little bit about the BAM?
Yeah.
Yeah? So I would take this question and somehow navigate it to because we are in connection with other media, but it's, as you would say, not on an international level, but just to locate us in this way of interacting. Maybe you want to say something about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 years ago, it was already, there was a alliance or coalition formed called BAM, Bündnis Alternativer Medien, And it was also very Vienna specific, some other in Austria, some other alternative media makers. And yeah, I mean, we are quite diverse from the background and also from the challenges, because some really pay, like they have two people employed, for example, to do Anschläge, which is a feminist magazine in Vienna, for example. Or there was also 2 radio stations where in this Bündnis, in this alliance. So very diverse group of people, and we try to be like really understand the context that we are in. But then again, it really comes down to a question of resources. Like, because we do everything without payment and money, there are hardly resources to do this paper, do this alliance work, and then even reach out on an international level. It's really, yeah, it's a resource question. I personally would love to connect more. I mean, I would say, because yeah, this is because there's in Germany there's the jungle world, for example. I don't know if you, and I don't know. I somehow, since I'm from Berlin, and I don't know, I see a big relation of like kind of the papers are sometimes very. I don't know. There are similarities, let's say, and we are in a loose contact also through personal people that in Vienna a friend is engaged in this project, for example. So yeah, so through personal connections there are sometimes links, but yeah, but then other than that, not really.
So it's mostly local, and we are not really like internationally connected at the moment. Yeah, because of, as you said, personal relationships are not, because it's easier if you know the person, it's a friend, or it's that's how it somehow works. So it's your free time, so who are you gonna call? Not Ghostbusters in this case, but yeah. So that's somehow how it works. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly check the timing, but yeah.
I mean,
I think we should slowly come to an end. Like the next workshop is supposed to start at 3,
yeah,
which will not happen. But maybe take the last round of questions, and then we have to wrap up.
Okay, so yeah, if there was something we didn't cover up at all, also maybe now is the moment for that. But okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because I think if I joined a political project, I would only do it if I thought there was the possibility to make it superfluous, to really change something. And it sounded a bit pessimistic to me when you said that you don't think that would be possible, and that MALMOE should still exist in like 10th of years in the future.
Yeah.
So maybe we collect the questions, and then we see maybe there are links, and we can. Oh, I see you. There's a question, and over there, and you had a question. No, yeah. I think this is about it.
Okay, I can tack directly onto that, which is that you mentioned at the beginning, again, the World Trade Organization protests, and that was a period where this phrase, the multitude, was very popular, meaning kind of leaderless, the party's kind of an obsolete form. And going back to what Sebastian said, perhaps in the last 10, 15 years, there's been like the return of the party question, and that period seems to have been maybe transient, or maybe kind of hastily concluded in a certain way. And so back to this other question, it seems like MALMOE would have come about during a certain moment, and that's why we were kind of asking about history, because we're kind of asking about have conditions changed which would cast MALMOE in a new way. Mm-hmm. Right, and perhaps that would actually clarify the other questions about goals. So,
my question goes also back to the founding moment of MALMOE, but like more the Austrian environment, and it sounded like anti-fascism is like a really, really important impulse. And what means anti-fascism for MALMOE? Is it like just defending like democratic state, or is it like in a way connected to transcending of like bourgeois society, bourgeois statehood, liberalism, or is it just like defending liberalism, like being against like the FPÖ and more like for the Greens or something? And how you're reflecting about like anti-fascism in the history? Is it like, yeah, what does anti-fascism even mean today?
Yeah. Quick round. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understood you right, but before you talked about you reflecting about the history by interviewing elder generations, and you said that you asked them more about how they felt during this process. And I wanted to ask what the impulse behind that was. Why was that an interesting question for you to ask your elders or like the people you inherited the project from?
At the beginning you said that you had some input for setting up a magazine like the DIY. I know, maybe just a few sentences.
The new project,
yeah. Okay, maybe last question then.
Yeah, my question is kind of similar to Danny's. You know, you mentioned the 1999 WTO protest, and that is sometimes referred to as the anti-globalization movement or the global justice movement. And that was influenced by the Zapatista uprising and NAFTA that was being signed at the time. And so the substance of that politics was really kind of an anti-neoliberalism. But today, of course, neoliberalism is being challenged by the mainstream and by the right. So, are there any changes on the horizon for MALMOE? Now that we're coming out of neoliberalism.
And you had a question, no? Like just.
Yeah, I think if I add my question to the mix, it's going to completely, dissolve.
This is just MALMOE, so you can just add your question. No? Okay.
Okay, so we have like major 3 topics, right? The process, the founding, and then the personal, approach to the process. Did I catch that right? Maybe we start with the personal approach of why we asked that, because I think it's pretty easy for me to answer it. It's we asked them how they felt because they all are not here anymore, and also it's a question for us sometimes because we're getting tired. From day to day, it's like, it's a beautiful project, but it's also frustrating. We're like 7 people, we try to give this thing a birth, and then it's just like employment here, for, like free time here, and I think it was a lot of, to get like, knowledge, like non-formalized knowledge of how they dealt with what are issues and how are we not getting tired by the process of being activists. So that was the main interest for me to ask those questions.
Yeah, and just adding to this, I mean, what's the fate somehow of a lot of grassroots left organization? No, they're not part of history, like history with capital H. So, and I think part of this reaching out was also to have their voices heard and written down and see what, like, to be part of the archive and be part of this newspaper. We haven't really talked about this, but what I also personally like about MALMOE is that it's really in the National Library, for example. And my little dream, or like I sometimes hope that, for example, in 100 years, some little researcher go into the archives and see, oh, wow, what happened actually there? As, I mean, just inspired by what friends are doing now and going to the archives and see actually how the world looked 100 years ago. So I think this was also a big impulse to just have those voices covered in this process of making history.
Then maybe quickly to the DIY thingy. So yeah, basically we meet with the editor team to talk about how to organize the new paper. As I said, we need about 2 months for the whole process. And then it's like gathering authors, putting responsibility to everyone, because there are some things that are always like, that's always Theo doing or me doing, and sometimes it's just, yeah, who's taking care of. Also structural problems. We have like, what's with social media, what is with our distribution. It all takes time, and sometimes we have to build like working groups also on that besides just producing the paper. And then basically it gets like, we have this great Excel sheet where everyone puts in what they're gonna do, and it's getting like more and more filled by the time, and in the end we just meet finally for page proof, sagt man das so? We have the graphic, we also have a lectorat. So MALMOE is not just the 7 people, I mentioned like the editors, but we have a group of supportive networks like a lectorat, people who do the design for us. And so these people are kind of, it's coming in, they do their thingy, and the process already has kind of automatism in it. So we don't have to think too much about that anymore. But just to quickly mention, the paper is going to be restructured, so let's see about this automatism, because we feel like the structure should fit us at the moment and not vice versa. So we felt like, I think, a lot of draining, and there are going to be some changes. So much for that process. And after the lectorat has done its final corrections and the graphic person set everything, we send it into print. We get the print ready-made MALMOE back, and then it's us getting a little bit of dirty hands with making the addresses on it, send them away, and be like, okay, now I need a network. So that's basically how it runs. Roughly. But if you have questions, we can also talk a little bit more into detail later.
Yes, I mean.
And then the third one, the third theme of topic. What was there? There was a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, there was one, the like what makes MALMOE anti-fascistic. I mean, I think it's also specific. That's why I was also hesitating with this link to international left newspapers, because I think I don't know, you know more about this, maybe not knowing you, but I just assume like the specific historical situation that Germany and Austria is in, no? And then, I mean, this is the Second World War, and genocides happened from these very places, and I think this is very important of this reflection process of like, what does it actually mean to be left in these places, and how is this informing again the newspaper, and also with the specific Austrian narrative, being the first victim, and to kind of, and this narrative is still strong, although it gotten reshaped and intervention happened and we're succeeding, but still there's this strong belief of being the first victim and this national narrative, and to intervene in this happens in a lot of articles, in a lot of perspective, also from perspectives that are actually not part of the hegemonic remembrance discourse, and trying to open up this gap. We have, like Sylvia, one of the founding mothers, I guess, founding figures. She's really looking at victims of the NS regime, which do not really have a voice, women's deportations, history, and like this sort of stuff, and really just really historical informed anti-classic, like in a way classic anti-fascism work, I would say. Yes. And then the other question, I think you have to take it up. I don't know, to make sense out of this crisis and to really ask the questions: what are the times we are living in right now, and how is actually COVID and whatnot informing new politics, how neoliberalism changes, and how new old conservative right-wing ideas take shape, the role of the nation state. And I can only invite you, if you feel like writing an article, we would be happy to have it and grasp for some answers about this rather big things. But I don't know what I could say, I think,
In 1 minute we have left, So maybe for this time it's just a big thank you for having such a nice discussion with us.